The repair job was supposed to be simple. Mark had been sent to Colony 7 to fix the water system in the lower sector. The pay was decent, and it was far from the noisy main city. For him, it meant peace. No politics. No trouble. Just work. But trouble found him anyway. It came in the form of a small figure running toward him across the dusty street. A little alien girl, no older than 8. With pale silver skin and big, tear-filled eyes, she stopped in front of him, clutching the edge of his tool bag. Like, it was her lifeline. "Human, please," she blurted, her voice trembling. "My mom's the kindest, you have to marry her." Mark froze. He thought he had misheard. "What?" The girl's grip tightened. "You have to marry her," she repeated, louder this time. "If you don't, they'll take her away." People on the street had stopped to watch. Some laughed. Others whispered. Mark felt the weight of every eye on him. He crouched down so he was level with her. "Slow down, kid," he said gently. "What's your name?" "Mira," she sniffled. "And you're a human. Humans can help." Mark glanced around. This wasn't the first time he'd been in an alien settlement, but the atmosphere here felt off. Buildings were worn down, windows cracked, shops looked half empty. Off. And the few adults watching him didn't seem friendly. "Where's your mom now?" he asked. "At home," Myra said, tugging his hand. "You have to come now before the bad men return." Mark hesitated. He had work to do. But the desperation in the girl's voice was too real to ignore. It wasn't a game. She was scared. And she thought he was her only hope. "All right," he said slowly. "Lead the way." Myra didn't let go of his hand as she pulled him through narrow alleys. The settlement was like a maze. Every turn took them deeper into the poorer district. He noticed people staring at him, not curious stares, but guarded, suspicious looks. Finally, they stopped in front of a small, broken-down home. The door was patched with scrap metal, and one side of the roof sagged dangerously. Inside, a woman knelt on the floor, repairing a cracked food container. Her hair, long and silver like Mira's, was tied back, and her hands were rough from work. When she looked up and saw Mark, her eyes widened. "Myra, what have you done?" she said, standing quickly. "You can't just bring strangers into our home." "But Mama," Mira argued, "he's human. He can protect us. He can marry you." Mark nearly choked. The woman's face flushed, not with embarrassment, but with alarm. "Child, hush. You don't understand what you're saying." Mark raised his hands. "Look, I think there's been some misunderstanding," he said. "I was just a loud knock rattled the door." Cutting him off, the woman froze. Her eyes flicked to Mira, then to Mark. "Stay quiet," she whispered, moving toward the door through the thin walls. Mark could hear voices outside. Leora. A deep voice called. "You have until sunset to pay what you owe. If you can't, you know the lawyer house and your rights will be forfeit." Mark felt his jaw tighten. The voice was cold, almost amused. Another voice added, "Maybe the widow can work off her debt in other ways." Followed by cruel laughter, Leora didn't open the door. She stood there, hands trembling, until the footsteps faded away. Only then did she turn to Mark. "You shouldn't be here," she said firmly. "They'll think you're involved." Mark didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at Mira, who was clutching her mother's dress and staring up at him with pleading eyes. "What happens if you can't pay?" he asked quietly. Leora hesitated. "They'll take my home, my work permit." "And Mira," she admitted, her voice breaking, "I'll be sent to labor camps, and she'll be put into a state orphanage." Mark's stomach turned. He had seen those camps before, and he knew orphanage was just another word for exploitation. "That's why you came to me?" he asked Mira. She nodded, her small voice trembling. "They can't hurt us if you marry Mama, right?" Mark didn't know how to answer. He didn't even know their marriage laws. But he knew one thing. He had walked into something much bigger than a broken water system. And walking away suddenly felt impossible. Mark didn't sleep that night. He had planned to fix a water system and leave quietly. Instead, he found himself in a stranger's home, with an alien mother and her daughter depending on him. The small room they gave him was little more than a bed and a cracked window, but it was warm. Warmth was rare in a place like this. From the next room, he could hear Mira's soft voice asking her mother questions. Will the human really help us? Leora's reply was too quiet to hear, but it carried a sadness that Mark couldn't ignore. By morning, he had made a decision. If he couldn't fix their whole life, maybe he could at least fix the threat in front of them over breakfast. A thin soup with more water than food, he spoke. Tell me about this debt, he said to Leora, her hands stilled on the bowl. It's not just money. She admitted, my husband. He worked for the sector authority. When he died, they said he owed fees for his work license. I can't pay it, Mark frowned. That's not how debts work where I'm from. He said, here it is. She replied bitterly, they make. Sure, widows can't survive alone. It keeps us desperate. And obedient, Myra spoke up, her little voice cutting the heavy silence. But if you marry her? They can't take our home, she said. Mark blinked. Why? Leora sighed. It's an old protection law, she explained. If a widow marries again, her new husband assumes her debts, but the sector authority won't force a human to work in the camps. They're afraid of causing trouble with your people. Mark understood now. This wasn't about romance. It was about survival. And the worst part was, it might actually work, still. The idea of marrying a stranger just to shield her from predators felt insane. You don't even know me, he said quietly. I know you didn't laugh at my child in the street, Leora replied. And that is more than I can say for most here. Before Mark could respond, a loud knock shook the door again. Leora went pale. Mark stood, ready this time. The door creaked open to reveal two tall enforcers in black armor. Behind them stood a man in fine robes, his sharp smile curling like a blade. Well, the widow has a guest, the man said, his eyes flicking over Mark. And a human, no less. Leora kept her head down. What do you want, Goran? She asked. The usual, Goran said smoothly. Stepping inside without being invited, you have until tonight to pay your debt. Or, his gaze slid to Mira. Mark's hands clenched. Or what? He asked, his voice cold. Goran smirked. Or I take what's owed in other ways. A worker, a home, a daughter. The room went silent. Mark stepped forward, blocking. Goran's view of Mira, you're not taking anything, he said. Oh, Goran tilted his head, amused. And why not? Mark's next words came out before he could stop them, because she's under my protection now. Leora gasped. Softly, Myra's eyes lit with hope. Goran, however, laughed. Under your protection. You'd have to marry her for that to mean anything here. Mark stared at him. The air between them felt heavy. Then maybe I will, he said. The laughter stopped. The enforcers shifted uneasily. Goran's smile faded into something sharper. Be careful, human, he said, his voice low now. You don't understand the rules of this place. Maybe I don't, Mark replied. But I understand bullies. And I don't scare easy. Goran left without another word. But the threat hung in the air like smoke. When the door shut, Leora turned to Mark, her eyes wide. You didn't have to say that, she whispered. Yes, I did, he answered. Because he was never going to stop, Mira ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. I knew you'd help us, she said, for the first time. Mark realized the weight of what he had just promised. It wasn't just about pretending. Anymore, if he backed down now, Goran would crush them, and if he went through with it, he'd be stepping into a fight with the entire corrupt system. Mark had been sent here to fix a broken pipe, but now it was clear the thing that really needed fixing was this place itself. By the next morning, the whole market seemed to know when Mark walked through the narrow streets to buy some supplies. Eyes followed him from every corner. Some looked curious, others shocked, but a few had the cold glare of disapproval too. Older merchants leaned close to whisper, "That's him, the human who said he'd take the widow's debt. Foolish. The enforcers will bleed him dry." The other muttered. Mark pretended not to hear. But their words stayed in his head when he reached the fruit stall. The vendor hesitated before selling to him. "You'd better be careful, human," she said. Softly, "You don't know how deep their claws go. Helping a widow here is dangerous." Mark just nodded. "I'll take the risk," he said, handing her the credits. Back at Leora's small home, Mira was outside playing with a broken toy when she saw him. She ran over and wrapped her arms around his leg. "You came back," she said with a bright smile. Mark ruffled her hair. "I told you I would, inside." Leora was repairing a torn blanket. She glanced up, her eyes meeting his. "You shouldn't be out alone right now," she said. "They're watching you. They're waiting for you to slip up." Mark shrugged. "Let them watch." "I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, something like relief crossed her face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "I don't understand you, human. You barely know us," she said quietly. Mark didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat down and began helping her patch the blanket. "Maybe I don't need to know everything," he finally said. "Maybe it's enough to know you don't deserve what's happening to you." That evening, while they ate together, there was a knock at the door. Myra froze. Leora's hand tightened around her spoon. Mark stood and opened the door slowly. It wasn't the enforcers this time. It was an elderly alien man with kind eyes. "My name is Ren," he said. "I heard what you did yesterday. Not many would stand against the collectors." Mark nodded cautiously. Ren stepped closer and lowered his voice. "They won't stop. If you want to protect them, you'll need more than words." Mark let him in. And the old man explained. The enforcers were not just collectors. They worked for the overseer, a powerful man who controlled trade, law, and punishment in the secta. Any widow who couldn't pay was either taken away or forced into servitude, and anyone who stood in the way usually disappeared. Leora sat silently, her hands folded in her lap. "This is why I didn't want you involved," she said. "They'll hurt you, Mark." But Mark leaned forward, his voice firm. "Then we make sure they can't." Ren studied him for a moment. "There is one way," he said, "in our law. A formal bond between species like the marriage or words implied grants certain protections. If you stand by it publicly, they will think twice before moving against you." Mark glanced at Leora. She looked away, clearly torn. "This isn't about feelings," he said. "This is about keeping you and Mira safe." Leora's eyes softened for just a moment. "Still, it's not a small thing," she whispered. Mira, who had been quietly listening from the corner, finally spoke. "If it keeps Mama safe, then I want it," she said simply. Mark looked at the little girl and realized she understood far more than she should for her age. Ren stood to leave. "Think on it," he said, "but not for too long. They will move soon." That night, Mark lay awake on the floor again. Outside, footsteps passed slowly by the house more than once. Someone was watching. He had a choice to make, either walk away now and save himself, or step fully into their fight. And deep down, he already knew his answer. The next day began with an uneasy calm. The streets were quieter than usual, and the usual noise of the market felt distant. Mark had the strange feeling that the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He didn't have to wait long. By midday, the sound of boots striking the stone road echoed from the main path. People stepped aside quickly. Pulling their stalls and baskets out of the way, the enforcers had arrived. Their leader, the same tall man with the cruel smile, walked in front. Behind him were 5 others, each carrying a weapon that hummed faintly. They stopped right at the edge of Leora's small yard. "Human," the leader called out. "You've been busy making promises you can't keep." Mark stepped outside, standing between them and the doorway. "I keep my promises," he said calmly. The leader smirked. "Then you won't mind proving it." Here and now, before everyone, with a wave of his hand, he signaled to his men, and they dragged a metal post into the street. The crowd began to gather, curious and wary. "According to our law," the leader continued, "if you truly take her debt, you take her name, her mark, and her bond. Fail here, and she comes with us." Leora appeared at the door, holding Mira close. Her face was pale. "Mark, you don't have to do this," she said in a trembling voice. He looked at her and shook his head. "Yes, I do." The leader stepped forward with a strange-looking device. It was a silver band with glowing edges. "This is the bond ring," he explained. "You put your hand in, and the mark is burned into your skin. If you pull away, you forfeit." Mark took a deep breath and held out his hand. The metal was cold at first, but the moment it locked around his wrist, a sharp heat seared into his skin. Pain shot through his arm, but he didn't move. He could hear whispers from the crowd, some surprised, some doubtful. The leader leaned closer. "You could still walk away. No shame in admitting you were in over your head." Mark met his gaze. "I'm not walking away." The heat grew stronger, the glowing lines carving a strange pattern into his skin. Mark clenched his jaw, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him falter. After what felt like an eternity, the device unlocked and dropped away. On his wrist was a mark, a twisting symbol that pulsed faintly with light. The leader's smile faded into something colder. "So be it," he said. "From this day, you share her debt, her name, and her enemies." He turned to the crowd and raised his voice. "You all heard it. By our law, the human is bound to the widow, Leora." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the people. Some looked impressed, others fearful. But Mark didn't care. His eyes were on Leora and Mira. The little girl was beaming, but her mother's face was a mix of relief and deep worry. As the enforcers left, Ren appeared from the edge of the crowd. "You just painted a target on your back. Human," he said quietly. Mark nodded. "Good. Now they'll know I'm not hiding." Back inside, Leora set Mira down and turned to him. "Do you understand what you've done? This isn't a game," she said sharply. Mark's voice was calm but firm. "I know exactly what I've done. Now they have to go through me first." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, almost too quietly to hear, she whispered, "Thank you." That night, the mark on his wrist still burned faintly. He knew the enforcers wouldn't stop. They'd only get more dangerous. But now, every time he saw Mira smile or Leora's guarded eyes soften, he knew he wouldn't regret it. Outside, in the shadows, 2 figures watched the small home. One of them spoke in a low voice. "The overseer will want to know about this human." The other replied, "He already does." The following morning, Mark woke to the sound of voices outside. Not the usual market chatter. This was quieter, sharper, like people trying not to be overheard. When he stepped outside, the street was strangely empty. Only Ren was leaning against a wall across the road, arms folded. "You've got a problem," Ren said flatly. Mark didn't bother asking. He could already feel it. "What kind?" he asked. "The kind that doesn't stop until you're broken or dead." Ren replied, "The overseer sent for you." Mark frowned. "And if I don't go?" Ren's voice lowered. "They'll take Leora and Mira instead, inside the house." Leora heard the words and froze. Her face went pale. "Mark, the overseer isn't like the enforcers," she whispered. "He enjoys making examples. He won't just threaten you. He'll make you fight for everything you've claimed." Mark looked at her and then at Mira, who was clutching her mother's hand. The thought of those men dragging her away was enough to make his blood run hot. "Then let's get this over with," he said. The overseer's hall was a massive, cold place made of black stone. Torches lined the walls, their light casting long shadows. At the far end sat the overseer himself, a broad alien with silver eyes and an expression that didn't change. He leaned forward as Mark approached. "So, this is the human who thinks he can take what's ours," the overseer said slowly. "I didn't take anything," Mark replied. "I kept you from taking what wasn't yours." A low chuckle echoed around the hall. "You speak boldly." The overseer said, "Let's see if your courage matches your tongue." He clapped his hands and a set of heavy doors opened. From the shadows stepped a creature unlike anything Mark had seen. Tall, armored in natural plates, with glowing red eyes and claws that scraped against the floor. "This is a Drask," the overseer explained casually. "It doesn't care about law or debt. It cares about blood. If you survive 3 minutes, the widow and her child are free of my claim. For now." Leora gasped. "This isn't a test. It's an execution," she whispered. Mark's jaw tightened. 3 minutes. "Fine," he said. "But when?" "I win, you leave them alone." The overseer's grin was slow and cold. "Begin." The Drask moved faster than Mark expected. It lunged, claws swiping, forcing him to dive to the side. He rolled, came up on his feet, and grabbed a loose metal pole from the wall. The creature roared, a sound that shook the floor, and came at him again. Mark didn't try to overpower it. That was suicide. He kept moving, letting it swing wide. Slamming the pole against its joints, every hit made it angrier. But also slower. Seconds crawled by, each one heavier than the last, from the side. Mira's small voice called out, "You can do it, Mark." That single shout lit something inside him when the Drask lunged again. He sidestepped and jammed the pole into the gap under its armored neck. The creature roared in pain, thrashing. Mark held on with everything he had, twisting until the Drask stumbled and crashed into the wall. The overseer raised a hand and a loud gong sounded. 3 minutes. He said, almost disappointed. Mark stepped back, breathing hard, sweat running down his face. The Drask growled but didn't attack. The overseer had called it off. "You live," the overseer said slowly. "And so do they." For now, Mark's eyes narrowed. "You keep your word." The overseer's silver eyes gleamed. "For now," he repeated. Outside the hall, Leora rushed to his side. "You're hurt," she said, reaching for his arm. "It's nothing," he replied, though the cuts on his side told a different story. Mira hugged his leg tightly. "I knew you'd win," she said. Mark smiled faintly. "Yeah, me too." But in his mind, he knew this wasn't the end. The overseer hadn't finished with them. This was only the first move in a much larger game, and if he wanted to keep them safe, he would have to be ready for the next one. 2 days passed. Mark's wounds were healing, but the air in the settlement felt heavier. People stared at him when he walked by, not with curiosity this time, but with something colder. Whispers followed him through the streets. "Human. Troublemaker. He's dangerous. Won't be long before the overseer makes him vanish." Leora noticed it too. At the market, a vendor refused to sell her fruit. Claiming he was out even though the baskets were full, another stall owner turned away the moment she approached. When she returned home with almost nothing, her shoulders were tense. "They're afraid," she told Mark quietly. "Afraid the overseer will punish them if they help us." Mark clenched his fists. "It's not fear, it's control," he said. "He's cutting us off without lifting a weapon." That evening, Ren came to the door. His face was serious, eyes scanning the street before he stepped inside. "The overseer isn't going to attack you again, not directly," Ren said. He's smarter than that. He's using the law now. What law? Mark asked. Wren tossed a folded notice onto the table. It was a formal summons. Mark was being called to the Civic Hall for an illegal custody review. They're claiming Mira isn't yours. To protect, Wren explained. They're saying she should be placed in a state home because her mother can't provide stable living conditions. Leora's face went pale. They want to take her away from me, she whispered. Mark. Read the paper again, every word twisting in his gut. They're not taking her, he said firmly. But the law didn't care about promises. It cared about proof. The next day, the hall was crowded. Citizens filled the benches, eager to watch the human who had dared stand against the overseer. At the front, a panel of 3 officials sat. With blank faces, the overseer wasn't there. He didn't need to be. His influence was already in the room. The lead official began, Mark Danner. Leora V's. The court will decide if the child Mira V's should be placed in the care of the state for her own safety. The prosecutor. A sharp-eyed alien with a voice like ice stepped forward. He painted a picture of Leora as unstable, unemployed, and dependent on an outsider who had no legal claim. Every word was calculated to make them seem unfit. Mark stood when it was his turn. He didn't know the right legal terms, so he spoke plainly. Mira is safe because she's with her mother. He said, she's alive because I stepped in when no one else would. If you take her away, you're not protecting her, you're breaking her. There was a murmur in the crowd. The officials whispered to each other. The prosecutor smirked. You have no proof the child is safer with you? Mark hesitated. Then he heard a small voice behind him. I can tell them, Mira said. Stepping forward before Leora could stop her, she looked up at the panel. My mom takes care of me. Mark helps her. He makes sure we have food. He fixed the roof, so I don't get wet when it rains. He reads me stories at night. The room was silent. Even the prosecutor seemed momentarily thrown off. And I want to stay with them, Mira finished. Her voice was soft. But every word carried weight. The officials didn't rule immediately. Instead, they declared that Leora had 1 week to prove she could earn her own living, or Mira would be removed. When they left the hall, Mark could feel the overseer's invisible hand in the decision. He wasn't trying to win in a single blow. He was trying to exhaust them until they broke. Wren caught up with them outside. He's testing you, he said. He wants to see if you can survive when the whole system is against you. Mark looked at Leora. She was holding Mira's hand tightly, but her eyes were hard. Then we. Don't give him what he wants, Mark said. We find work, we keep her with us, and we make him regret ever starting this. That night, they sat at the small table, going over ideas. Every option was dangerous. Most businesses wouldn't hire someone the overseer had marked. Finally, Leora spoke. There's one place outside the overseer's reach, she said slowly. Mark raised an eyebrow. Where? The old mining sector, she replied. It's abandoned by most, but there are still deep ore pockets. People who go there either come back rich or not at all. Mark leaned back. Sounds like a risk. Leora nodded. It is. But it's the only way we could make enough in a week. They all knew what it meant. Dangerous work, unstable tunnels, and the chance they might not return at all. But as Mark looked at Mira's hopeful eyes, he realized there was no real choice. If keeping her safe meant walking into the dark, then that's where they'd go. The next morning came cold and heavy. Mark was awake before the sun, staring at the faint glow of the settlement's lamps through the small window. Today was the day. They had 7 days to prove Leora could support her daughter. But after the court hearing, they both knew the overseer wouldn't allow it to happen through normal means. The only real option left was the old mining sector, dangerous, unstable, and outside the overseer's control. Leora moved quietly around the kitchen, packing what little food they had into a cloth bag. Mira sat at the table, swinging her Legs nervously. She was trying to act brave, but her eyes kept darting between her mother and Mark. "Will you both come back?" she asked suddenly, her voice almost a whisper. Mark knelt beside her. "I promise," he said. But deep down, he knew promises meant nothing in the mines. Still, he gave her a smile and squeezed her hand. "You just be ready to tell me one of your stories when I get back." Ren met them near the edge of the settlement. He had a small crawler, an old mining transport vehicle. Dented and patched, but still running. "I managed to get you access to an unregistered shaft." He said no overseer guards, no paperwork. "But that also means no rescue if something goes wrong." Mark nodded. "That's fine." Leora climbed into the crawler, checking the gear they had: a pair of mining lamps, a basic drill, and a few oxygen canisters. It wasn't much, but it was all they could get. The crawler rumbled over broken ground, heading for the jagged hills where the old mines lay. The further they went, the more silent the air became. No animals, no wind, just the crunch of tires on stone. The mine entrance loomed like a black mouth in the hillside. Its old support beams were splintered, the warning signs faded. "This place hasn't been touched in years," Leora said quietly, "which means the ore might still be rich." Mark replied. They strapped on their lamps, the beams cutting thin slices of light through the dark. Inside, the air was cool and dry. Their footsteps echoed against the stone. The tunnel sloped downward, twisting into the earth. Old tracks for mining carts ran along the floor, rusted and warped. They worked in silence at first, chipping at the walls, filling small buckets with fragments that glittered faintly. It was back-breaking work. After an hour, they had only a few handfuls of ore worth taking. Leora's breathing was heavy, but she didn't complain. "This isn't enough," she said, wiping sweat from her brow. "We need to go deeper." Mark hesitated. The deeper tunnels were less stable. But the clock was ticking. Every hour they wasted meant Mira was closer to being taken away. "All right," he said. "We go deeper." They followed the tracks until they reached a junction where 3 tunnels branched off. The middle one was blocked by a partial cave-in. The right one had water dripping from the ceiling, a sign the structure might be weak. The left was dry, but the air there felt strange, almost charged, like the moments before a lightning storm. "This way," Leora said, choosing the left. Mark followed, his hand resting on the drill's grip. Something about the tunnel made the hair on his neck stand up. They found a chamber after 20 minutes. The walls here sparkled more brightly. The ore was richer, thick veins running through the rock. They got to work immediately. The sound of the drill filled the space, echoing off the stone. For a while, it was just work hard, exhausting work, until Mark's drill bit hit something that rang different, a metallic clang that didn't belong to the stone. He stopped, frowning. Leora, "There's something here." They cleared the rock away carefully. What emerged was not more ore, but an old sealed crate. The surface was stamped with markings neither of them recognized. "This isn't from the mining company," Leora whispered. Mark pried it open, revealing rows of metal ingots, each stamped with a symbol. This could be worth a fortune," he said. Leora's eyes widened, enough to buy a home, enough to keep Myra safe forever. They didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. 3 figures stepped into the chamber, armed, armored, and with the cold eyes of men who lived outside the law. "Well, well," the leader said, his voice low and amused. "Looks like we're not the only ones who know about the old tunnels." Mark stepped forward, placing himself between the strangers and Leora. "We don't want trouble," said. The leader smirked. "Good. Then, hand over the crate and walk away." Leora tightened her grip on the drill. "This is ours. We found it." The man's smile faded. "You think the overseer's the only one who makes rules? Down here, it's simple. If you can't keep it, it's not yours." The 2 groups stood frozen. the dim light making every shadow seem alive. Mark's heart pounded. They were outnumbered, but not entirely helpless. The drill could be a weapon, and the unstable tunnel could be used to their advantage. He made a choice. Without warning, he slammed the drill into the support beam beside him. The wood cracked, a deep rumble shivering through the rock. "What the hell are you doing?" one of the men shouted, making sure nobody gets it. Mark said, grabbing Leora's arm, "Run." The tunnel shuddered violently as stones began to fall. Dust filled the air, making it hard to see. They sprinted toward the main shaft. The sound of the men shouting behind them. A boulder crashed down, blocking the path. Mark and Leora slid under just in time. When they finally burst into the open air, gasping, the hillside groaned and collapsed, sealing the tunnel forever. They didn't have the crate, but in Leora's bag were 3 ingots she had hidden when the strangers first appeared. It wasn't the fortune they'd hoped for, but it was enough to buy time. Mark looked at her and smiled despite the exhaustion. "You thought ahead," she smirked faintly. "You taught me too." Back in the settlement, word spread fast. Some whispered that the human and the widow had cheated death in the mines. Others muttered that they were lucky, too lucky. But when the court day came again, Leora stood tall before the officials. "I have proof of income," she said, placing one of the ingots on the table. The officials examined it, exchanging surprised looks. "This is more than enough," the lead one admitted. Case closed. The ruling was final. Mira would stay with her mother. The overseer's face was unreadable when they passed him outside. He didn't speak. But Mark could see something in his eyes. Not defeat, exactly, but recognition. The kind of look one man gives another when he knows the fight isn't over. That night, they ate a real meal for the first time in weeks. Mira sat between them, chattering about the stories she'd been saving for Mark's return. When she called him Dad without thinking, Mark froze for a moment. Leora noticed and smiled softly. "She's been wanting to say it," she said quietly. Mark swallowed hard. "Well, I guess I've been wanting to hear it for the first time in a long time." The small home felt warm, not just from the fire, but from something deeper. The sense that, at least for now, they had beaten the odds. But outside, in the cold streets, the overseer watched from the shadows, and Mark knew this was only the first chapter in a much bigger war.